It starts with a single craving, a moment of weakness, a whispered promise that this time will be the last time. Just one more hit, one more scroll, one more drink, one more escape from the weight of reality pressing down on your chest. And most people, they surrender to it. They rationalize it. They tell themselves it's harmless, that they're in control, that they can stop whenever they want to, until they realize they can't. Until the vice becomes the master, and they become the servant. And by the time they recognize the chains, it's already too late. Because addiction ignored is addiction empowered. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. In a world obsessed with power, control, and the will to dominate one's circumstances, he knew that freedom isn't something you stumble into. It's something you fight for with every fiber of discipline you possess. And when a vice has its grip on you, your next move determines everything. Not just whether you break free, but whether you ever become the person you were meant to be before the addiction stole your potential. Because addiction is rarely about the substance itself at first. It's a test of your will. And if you fail it, you're not just marked as weak, you're marked as lost to yourself forever. So when you realize you're addicted, do this not tomorrow, not next week, not when you feel ready, immediately. If you found value in what you're about to hear, make sure to subscribe to Beyond Sanity. We explore the darkest truths about power, control, and the human condition, the knowledge most people are too afraid to confront. Hit that subscribe button now, because what comes next will change how you see yourself and your vices forever. You go silent, but not compliant. Because here's the first Machiavellian law of handling addiction. The person who fights the urge emotionally loses the battle before it begins. But the person who withdraws strategically, who steps back and observes their own patterns without judgment, becomes unpredictable to the addiction itself. And unpredictability creates space. Silence doesn't mean giving in. It means withdrawing your automatic response. You don't justify the craving. You don't pretend it's not there. You don't negotiate with it or promise yourself you'll indulge just a little bit. You make it feel your absence in your actions, in your refusal to feed it, in your complete withdrawal of the energy it depends on. It's a hard pause in the rhythm the addiction has created, a sudden disruption in the pattern it expected to control. Because addiction only thrives when it gets what it wants. Immediate gratification, emotional avoidance, the quick dopamine hit that makes everything else fade away. But when it's met with cold stillness, with absolute refusal to engage, it reveals itself for what it truly is, a parasite that cannot survive without your consent. Machiavelli never acted impulsively. He observed. He allowed his enemies to reveal their patterns, their weaknesses, their predictable moves before ever making his own. And when he did respond, it was never with hesitation. It was with calculated precision. That's your next move. Recognize the pattern, not through shame, not through self-hatred, but through brutal honesty. Because when addiction controls you, it expects an emotional spiral. It wants you to feel guilty, to beat yourself up, to collapse into despair so that you reach for the vice again to numb the pain. What it doesn't expect is clarity. So you sit down, you grab a pen and paper, and you write with surgical calm every single trigger that leads you back to the addiction. What time of day does it happen? What emotions precede it? Who are you with? What thoughts run through your mind seconds before you give in? Each answer is a controlled extraction of truth. You're not denying the addiction, you're mapping it, dissecting it, understanding its mechanics so thoroughly that it can no longer ambush you. Most people never do this because they're afraid of what they'll find. They're terrified to admit how predictable they've become, how their entire day revolves around the next fix, the next escape, the next moment of weakness disguised as relief. But when you face the pattern with cold clarity and write it down in black and white, the addiction begins to lose its mystery. And that loss of mystery is what you want. Not inspiration, not motivation, understanding. Because the person who understands their enemy, who knows exactly when and how the attack will come, doesn't need to rely on willpower alone. They can prepare. They can redirect. They can dismantle the conditions that made the addiction possible in the first place. But here's where the game gets deeper. Most people can resist once, maybe twice. What they can't handle is the long war. The addiction knows this. It knows that if it just waits long enough, if it applies pressure consistently, eventually you'll crack. You'll convince yourself that one time won't hurt, that you've earned it, that you deserve a break from the constant battle. So the third step is this. Reframe the relationship between you and the vice immediately. You don't negotiate with it. You don't give it a seat at the table. You declare war. Total, absolute, no exceptions war. Machiavelli knew that half measures in conflict lead to prolonged suffering. If you're going to fight an enemy, you destroy it completely, or you don't fight at all. So, if the addiction has taken root in your life, let your new posture echo louder than any promise to quit ever could. Remove access to the substance, delete the apps, throw out the bottles, burn the bridges to the dealers, the enablers, the environments where the vice lives and breathes. You don't need to announce your decision. Let them feel it. This is what separates the free from the enslaved. It's not resistance through gritted teeth and white-knuckled endurance. It's elimination through calculated removal of every pathway back. You've shown yourself in the world I am not available for this anymore, and I won't explain myself to make anyone comfortable about it. And now the internal current flows differently. The cravings still come, but they find no opening. Your environment has been stripped of ammunition. Your routines have been redesigned. Your mind begins to notice that the addiction, for all its noise and desperation, cannot actually force you to do anything. It can only suggest. It can only whisper. It can only wait for you to give it permission. And you stop giving permission. That's how you begin to end it. Not with anger, not with shame, but with exactly what the addiction didn't expect. Discipline, distance, and total refusal to make comfort more important than freedom. Addiction is never isolated. It's a signal, a symptom, a smoke alarm screaming that something deeper is burning inside you. And once you allow one vice to run unchecked, like one drink that turns into 10, one video that spirals into hours, one pill that becomes a daily necessity, you've taught your brain that escape is easier than confrontation. And Machiavelli would tell you once your mind sees you as someone who runs from pain instead of through it, reclaiming your will costs double the effort. So in the aftermath of that first act of resistance, after you've removed access, mapped the pattern, and created distance, what happens next is just as critical, because the addiction will test you again, not in the same way, but in subtler, more insidious ways. It'll whisper that you're overreacting, that you weren't that bad, that moderation is possible, that everyone else can handle it, so why can't you? It'll send old friends, old routines, old memories wrapped in nostalgia to pull you back. That's when you make your second move, reinforce the boundary through disproportionate action. Machiavelli's philosophy wasn't built on fairness or balance. It was built on survival and dominance. And he understood something few people are willing to accept about breaking addiction. If your response to relapse is gentle self-forgiveness and trying again tomorrow, the addiction learns it can outlast you. But if your response is immediate, harsh, and undeniable, it becomes a scar the addiction remembers. You're not punishing yourself out of hatred. You're creating consequences that matter. You slip once, you don't just feel bad about it. You remove something you value from your life for a week. No entertainment, no social media, no comfort foods. You make the cost of failure so steep that your brain rewires itself to avoid it. You make relapse more painful than resistance. This isn't cruelty, it's conditioning. You're teaching yourself through lived experience that the momentary pleasure of giving in is nothing compared to the suffering that follows. And once that lesson is learned, not intellectually but viscerally, in your bones and in your behavior, the addiction loses its primary weapon. It can no longer promise relief because you know the price is too high. But here's the brutal truth most people refuse to face. Addiction doesn't exist in a vacuum. It lives in the gaps, the boredom, the loneliness, the lack of purpose, the hours you spend scrolling because you have nothing else that makes you feel alive. And if you remove the vice but leave the void, you've solved nothing. You've just created a pressure cooker waiting to explode. So the next step, and this is where most people fail, is to fill the space the addiction occupied with something that demands more of you than the vice ever did. Machiavelli believed that men are motivated by two things: fear and ambition. Fear keeps you from falling back, but ambition pulls you forward. And without something worth pursuing, something that lights a fire in your chest and refuses to let you settle, you'll always be one bad day away from reaching for the old comfort. So you find it. You hunt for it. You build it if it doesn't exist. A goal so consuming that the addiction becomes irrelevant. Maybe it's a body you've never had. Maybe it's a skill you've always admired. Maybe it's a business, a mission, a vision of who you could be if you stopped wasting your potential on things that destroy you. It doesn't matter what it is. It only matters that it's real, that it's yours, and that it demands everything you have. Because here's the secret Machiavelli knew, and addicts rarely realize. Discipline isn't about restriction. It's about direction. When your energy has nowhere to go, it stagnates and rots. But when it's channeled towards something greater than yourself, it becomes unstoppable. And suddenly, the addiction that once ruled your life feels small, pathetic. A desperate attempt to feel something in a life that had no meaning. But now you have meaning. Now you have direction. And the vice that once seemed impossible to resist becomes laughably easy to ignore. Because you're not fighting against something anymore. You're moving towards something. And that shift, that single reorientation of your will, is the difference between someone who quits 100 times and fails, and someone who quits once and never looks back. Now here's where the transformation deepens, because once you've removed the substance, conditioned yourself against relapse, and filled the void with purpose, you'll notice something strange. The cravings don't disappear. They morph. They become quieter, more patient, more clever. They'll wait for moments of weakness, stress, exhaustion, success, celebration, anything that gives them an opening. And this is where most people relapse. They think they've won. They let their guard down. They convince themselves they're cured. And the addiction, which was never dead, just dormant, strikes. Machiavelli warned that the greatest danger comes not from known enemies but from complacency in victory. So you never declare victory. You stay vigilant. You treat sobriety not as a destination, but as a daily discipline. A war you win one morning at a time. You wake up and you choose freedom again. Not because it's easy, not because the cravings are gone, but because you've decided that no temporary pleasure is worth surrendering the person you're becoming. And that decision, repeated every single day without exception, is what builds the kind of character that addiction cannot penetrate. You become someone the vice no longer recognizes, someone it can't manipulate, someone who has rebuilt themselves from the ground up with principles so solid that even the whisper of temptation feels like an insult to who you are now. This is the apex of self-mastery, not the absence of desire, but the presence of something stronger, a version of yourself that refuses to betray your own progress for anything. And here's the final piece, the part that most people never reach because they give up too early. Once you've broken free, once you've proven to yourself that you can live without the vice, you gain something more valuable than sobriety. You gain proof. Proof that you are not weak. Proof that you are not a victim of your circumstances. Proof that when you decide something with absolute certainty, nothing can stop you. And that proof becomes the foundation for everything else you build in life. Because the person who has conquered addiction has conquered the hardest enemy there is, themselves. And once you've done that, everything else, building wealth, building relationships, building legacy, becomes possible. Not because it's easier, but because you've already proven you have what it takes. You've already walked through the fire and come out stronger. You've already stared down the voice that told you to give up and you told it no. That's the gift Machiavelli would want you to understand. Addiction isn't just a problem to solve, it's a trial to pass. And on the other side of that trial is a version of you that most people will never meet because they never had the courage to face their demons head on. But you did. You removed access. You mapped the pattern. You conditioned yourself against failure. You filled the void with purpose. You stayed vigilant even in victory. And now, you're free. Not because the cravings are gone, but because they no longer control you. Not because life is easy, but because you've become the kind of person who doesn't need easy. You need challenge. You need growth. You need the satisfaction of knowing that every single day, you chose yourself over the thing that tried to destroy you. And that choice repeated endlessly, becomes who you are. Someone the addiction can no longer touch. Someone who has taken back their power, their time, their future, and their soul. That's how you end it. Not with hope, not with wishful thinking, but with the cold, calculated discipline of someone who decided they would rather die free than live as a slave. And once you've made that decision, truly made it, nothing can take it from you. Not the cravings, not the triggers, not the old friends or the old routines or the voice in your head that says you're not strong enough. Because you've already proven you are. And that proof is permanent.